So up next, I would like to present our next session titled History of Chinese Students at Phillips Academy. Presentations will be made by Hijoo Zoon and Paige Roberts.
Hey there, my name is Hijoo Sun, and I'm an instructor of history as well as the geographer at large at Phillips Academy. And today my co-presenter, Paige Roberts, who is the director of archives and special collections here at Phillips Academy. We want to bring attention to a collection of primary source materials from the Phillips Academy archives and special collections that document the history of Chinese students at Phillips Academy from 1878 to 2000. Together, we are engaged in making the record of Chinese students available to the larger public, to educators, to students, and general audiences alike. Toward this end, in the spring of 2019, about a year ago, we applied for and received a $30,000 grant to scan, catalog, and design into a website these materials, including original correspondences, images, travel diaries, student records, receipts, and other primary source documents. At this point, the Northeast Document Conservation Center has finished the scanning portion, and we have started cataloging. We are trying to hire a digital humanist to build a robust, searchable website that will include the historical context, the high-quality scans of documents, lesson plans for teachers, and work by students. Half of our funds were granted through a PA internal grant called the Abbott Academy Fund, while the other half was procured with the help of the Development Office by a donor. There are numerous angles through which to highlight this archive, but in this arena, we want to note the importance of this collection to showcase a rich and important education migration history that shaped Chinese modernity, the history of Sino-America relations, and the history of Asians in America. Oops, let me go back. And the background photo for our title page was this picture of the Phillips Academy 1881 baseball team, in which you see there in the lower right, Sir Liang Cheng, who is the first Chinese graduate of Phillips Academy, or one of the first. And he goes on to become a pretty distinguished statesman as the first, a diplomat, if you will, to the US and to Germany. Some 176 Chinese students matriculated into Phillips Academy from 1878 to 1990s, at the same time that the US established the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and the Asian Exclusion Act of 1924. While the flow decreased and ceased altogether from the 1930s to the 1960s, the exchange of PA and Harbin Institute of Technology that began in the 1980s and continued into the 1990s resumed the flow of Chinese exchange students at Phillips Academy. So here you'll note this is a handmade graph in a report that I will discuss in a second, but here we have 1882 demarcated, and you see here no official Chinese students coming into Phillips Academy here starting in the 1930s and then ending right around the end of 1960s. Very few Chinese students. That really picks up by the 1980s into the 1990s. Ironically then, the Phillips Academy archives large cache of materials, records the history of Sino-American educational exchange during an era of hostile US migration policy at the turn of the century and in the post-1990 Tiananmen era, post-Tiananmen era of the 1990s. Paige and I also had the opportunity to teach with this archive a course titled Silences and Gaps, the record of Chinese students in the Phillips Academy archive. And it interrogates the record through 5 lenses, if you will, of contextualizing, reading, reporting, visualizing, and then curating the archive. Our course focuses largely on the question of why such a rich archive had largely been ignored, and therefore structured one of the contexts of reading through archives along the register of social justice in archives. We hope to publish this presentation, and in the publication, you'll see that we read our authors such as Caswell and Sifor, Green, Hughes-Watkins, Akile, Jimerson, and Zinn, and others. The official published history of Phillips Academy, Youth from Every Quarter, includes a brief mention of Chinese students during the 1870s, and Principal Al Stearns, who was the principal from 1903 to 1933, a 30-year run, interest in supporting Chinese students during the 1910s and 1920s. He was personally the guardian for a lot of these kids. And you'll see here, an Abbott Academy Fund grant from 1991 enabled a PA employee named Sue Hess, who wasn't a teacher here nor an archivist. She completed a research project about Chinese students at Andover, but it received very little attention. Yet the collection of materials about Chinese students is unusually rich in that there is no comparable collection at other archival repositories documenting the education of Chinese students studying abroad at a secondary school, sponsored both privately by families and individuals, and officially by the state in the late 19th century and 20th century United States. Here's a report of Sue Hess's, and she collates and brings together the 176 students from 1878 to the 1990s. Here's another page from her study that shows that before 1980, most were boys, and after there was a good kind of equal balance, but the school did become, Phillips Academy and Abbott Academy did become co-ed in 1973. Most of the students you'll see are from China, China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Why has such a significant archive been so sparsely tapped into? Collections in cultural heritage institutions, particularly archives, reflect and reinforce social power structures. Thus, archives are not neutral. The power of the archive may be witness to inclusion, but also include distortions, omissions, erasures, and silences. Silence is an important exercise of control and power. While this is typical of institutional archives that inherently documents an official story, we discover from our students' papers that there is a radical potential in rereading the archives, the accounts and receipts, gender dynamics, sentiments and emotions, and even some of rereading how to understand missing files and omissions. One obvious answer to our question then is that, well, there's historically been a lack of interest in this record, that's evident, as well as a disrupted flow of educational migrations due to the calamitous history of wars, especially in Asia in the 20th century. Future research and student or scholarly findings, however, can yield alternative narratives to the missing or official ones. As one of our students, Jillian Zhang, wrote in her conclusion to her report, quote, "It is well established that many of these students' careers and lives after PA are omitted from or unknown in this institution's history and archive. So I think the course should incorporate more of a focus on contacting, interviewing, and in turn, recording the voices and stories of Asian alumni. This thus ensures that we students are not only recognizing the gaps present in PA's archive, but making an active effort to change the paradigm of record keeping. Reparational acts can be as simple as an update of the contact information of past Asian students, but each and every act serves to counteract the ways which Andover Archive historically has conducted its operations," unquote. So I'm going to go into a section called Findings, which reflects this course both in terms of content and pedagogy. In terms of content, our 6 students' cumulative work include data visualizations, reports, curated posters, here presented to the Board of Trustees during the fall. Last year, provide the gist of the findings. Students examine Chinese students' finances, sentiments, emotions, gender dynamics, and student ability, character, industry, and the sense of belonging. Overall, the reading of the archive demonstrates that, well, Chinese students were quite content and happy here, and most really went on to become quite successful in their careers. But there were equally many questions, missing files, certain unknowns. One student acknowledges that by reading Frank Lin's financial records, a student who graduated in 1923, she could try, quote, to uncover enough to have an idea of someone, even if she were wrong, at least she tried, unquote. Other students pinpoint the gaps in knowledge due to incomplete information, especially in the case of the Harbin Institute of Technology students, omissions and missions in the case of the Yuan brothers, or masculine dominance in an all-boys school that altogether ignore the opinion of female students in the early 20th century. In the case of Frank Lin, student Sophie Huang points out how financial concerns were demonstrate some of the struggles of students here from China in the 1920s. Indeed, Suhas's paper noted that Lin constantly, quote, worried about his finances and that his financial accounts with Dr. Stearns often got overdrawn despite his frugality, unquote. The visualization here show, these are Sophie Huang's visualizations, show the extraordinary number of receipts in the archive for Lin. In 1924 and 1927 especially, the bar graph here explains that this era, these 2 years were the years he matriculated into and graduated from MIT and returned to China. Noting that Lin's financial records and files were embedded in Principal Alfred Stern's files, Sophie notes that, quote, a defining limitation in my research was the placement of the archive around Stearns and not Frank Lin. She concludes, quote, in this way, the construction and curation of the record still holds Stearns at the center of their narrative. Jillian Zhang's research focuses on the gender gap of Harbin students who came to Phillips Academy during the 1980s and 90s. Interestingly, her research method of contacting these alumni via email, LinkedIn, personal introductions, alumni offices of both Phillips Academy and the alumni offices of the colleges and graduate schools of these students demonstrates how even the third substantial wave of Chinese students to study at PA, which was this era of the 1980s and 90s, of the Harbin Institute of Technology students, many of them have been overlooked. Not only were they not in some of the alumni record and directory, but when Zhang reached out to various alma mater, such as here UC Stanford, UPenn, and U Chicago, even if they could not provide contact information due to privacy matters, some of them had very little knowledge of where they were and what their current occupation was. She wanted to look at if whether or not the female graduates of Harbin HIT and the male graduates had similar jobs and current positions today could reflect perhaps something about their gender distinctions, dynamics. They were some of the most talented students from Northeast China to be sent to Phillips Academy on an exchange, often with their tuition paid for a year or longer, yet they remain insignificant in our record. There could be two historical reasons that I suggest. I could provide some context. First, Harbin is in Manchuria, the northeast region that is the homeland of the Manchus, also known as the barbarians, quote unquote barbarians, who ruled the last Qing dynasty from 1644 to the 1911. This region is also the first area that Japanese colonized in early 1930s with the state of Manchukuo. As a matter of place then, perhaps this is not where the locus of institutional mainstream interests lie. Olivia Lai's paper on sentiment shows yet another gender dynamic in the earliest of female Chinese students. Overall, this student used sentiment analysis to quantify whether or not Chinese students were happy in the US that was largely anti-Chinese at that time. While sentiment analysis is usually limited to categorizing text on the basis of polarity, so positive, negative, neutral, Olivia read 97 letters of approximately 6 or so students by hand and was able to classify very much in detail, much more in detail. She was identify the emotions present in the words and phrases of each letter using 6 categories of happiness, excitement, success, worry and fear, difficulty, and sadness. Here is a data dictionary that she created in her report for us. In addition to her finding that the students were generally happy overall, on the 35 to 50% range, despite the historical context, her work presented some interesting and surprising, not so surprising, gender dynamics by reading the comparison of 3 siblings, the Sun siblings, who studied here in the 1920s. Arthur and Charles Sun were accompanied to PA alongside their sister Mary, a rare occurrence of a Chinese daughter sent alongside her 2 male siblings to an American boarding school. Indeed, in all of Alfred Stern's files during his 30 years here, there are only 2 female files, Mary Sun and Helen Tsai. Helen Tsai is also a sister of a PA student, Alfred Tsai. Mary and Helen both attended Abbott Academy. As student Olivia Lai describes, Mary Sun's experience is, quote, valuable in that it provides a rare glimpse into how gender intersected with class and race to alter her experience as a Chinese international student, unquote. Especially in discussions where to send Mary to college, Stearns wholly recommended Mount Holyoke over Wellesley, stating, this is the median excitement, and this is the worry. So there's a lot of worry here in 1925, and it peaks out, it comes back here in August. And his recommendation, Alfred Stearns' recommendation to attend Mount Holyoke, he writes, quote, if she's to go to college as you intimate, my preference would be for Mount Holyoke over Wellesley. The latter has an enviable reputation, but it has seemed to me, and to many of my friends as well, that in recent years there has been in that college altogether too strong a tendency to a kind of radicalism that doesn't make for the highest type of womanhood or for the ultimate welfare of humanity, unquote. Olivia writes these words and others that at base represented that Mary was quite sad for about, she concludes, 80% of her time at PA. Quote, without consulting Mary about her preference, Stearns effectively silenced Mary in the service of his highest type of womanhood, unquote. One of the greatest findings and biggest mystery was our student William Young's paper titled The Education of Yuan Shikai's Sons at Phillips Academy. Yuan Shikai was the first Chinese president of the Republic in 1912, a statesman who served the last Qing dynasty as a military and diplomatic figure and rose to great power in the late 19th century. He had 13 sons with his 1 wife and 9 concubines, busy man. Surprisingly, we discovered that 3 of his sons, or William discovered, had attended PA. His sons William, Henry, and Thomas Yuan attended for several years in the 1920s, even if none graduated. William and Henry were the sons of the 5th concubine named Yang Shi, while Thomas was the son of Wu Shi, one of Yuan's 3 Korean concubines he brought back to China after his 12-year stay as kind of a statesman working in Korea in the late 1890s and early 1900s. While our student William read some 60 letters related to the Yuan brothers, he never fully understood why they never finished and received a diploma because there were some missing files for the Yuan brothers case. We knew that Thomas, in particular, the youngest, came under probation during his time. He's not even mentioned here in this particular article in the Sunday Sun. Of their special status, William wanted to study the ability, character, and industry of these boys. And he did a visualization of the files that he did read, and he compared it to a set of files for the Wright brothers and a Japanese student named Kiyoshi Yamaguchi, who attended PA simultaneous to the Yuan brothers. So when we received the file from these years, none of the files for the Yuan brothers were there, but the Wright brothers and a Japanese student named Yamaguchi was there. Of his visualization entitled Special Exemption, here is a visualization of character, industry, and ability of the Yuan brothers. It's quite low. You have here also special exceptions. This is especially very high for room arrangements for the three brothers, 1, 2, 3. They had a lot of privileges, including English tutoring, permission to leave school early, reserving a place in Andover, room arrangements, and a special meeting with principal. Such special treatment are equally indicated by a letter by Eddie Brewer, Eddie, who asked Principal Stearns to think of admitting the Yuan brothers to PA as a type of diplomatic favor to China at this time. The Yuan boys had also a special handler named Everett Skilling from Middlebury College, whose precise role remains vague as the result of the missing files. Similar to Jillian, Olivia, and Sophie's conclusion, William also writes, quote, "I realize that the main issues with data visualizations is that it glosses over individual stories. The purpose of data visualizations is to identify trends that encompasses a whole community, but it is often at the expense of depth and specificity that characterize individual stories." And Paige will address this in the conclusion part about the students' kind of frustration at not being able to study individual characters, which is what they really wanted to do in depth. In terms of pedagogy, we're greatly aided by our third co-teacher and computer scientist, Nick Zufelt, who helped students use computing methods to quantify and qualify this digital corpus. The students mainly used two programs. First, Tableau, to produce pie charts, bar graphs that you saw, point distribution, and a second, Sankey diagrams, to think through the qualitative analysis that they were forwarding in visual form. In this pedagogical examination of the archive, we used traditional analytic methods that we read in the archive, and we tried to note in our questions, producing a question based upon what the students were reading and asked them to quantify their findings through digital representation. So here, for example, is, I showed this already earlier, Franklin's expenses, and she wanted to think about this more than as just numbers. And so she used a Sankey, this is Sophie Huang's Sankey, that basically noted the thickness in volume and the nodes in terms of topics such as athletics, academic, holidays, etc., between Alfred Stearns and Franklin, and also including the person who was his handler in the China side in Manchuria, P.L. Chang, and a person named S.H. Lin. So from here, Paige will talk about how we got here, where we're headed, and then a conclusion.
Hi, my name is Paige Roberts, and I'm Director of Archives and Special Collections at Phillips Academy. How did we get here and where are we headed? Building on Sue Hess's 1991 project, we've been collaborating with a scholar of Chinese at MIT since 2016. And numerous Phillips Academy students have already provided extensive volunteer support through critical research and document scanning at an early phase. Equally, faculty in the PA, English, and Chinese departments have used this digitized material in courses to complicate narratives of school history. With this work, we created a beta website to promote the project in 2017. Along the way, though, we've encountered a few challenges. First, the Academy does not apply for public funds, and our institution does not have policies in place to support applications to private external grants. As a result, our CLEAR grant proposal, which was prepared with our MIT colleague, did not come to fruition. In addition, we overestimated the number of documents to be scanned for grant proposals because the archival collections were off campus and inaccessible due to a library renovation. The project thus far has focused on digitization and sharing the collection and basic historical context online. But we're eager to incorporate additional work to engage students, enhance student learning, and expand the research both in depth and across time in future phases. In one instance, we plan to have students conduct oral history interviews with Chinese alumni who came to Andover from the Harbin Institute of Technology between 1980 and 2000. In another, we would like to organize a transcribe-a-thon for students and alumni to transcribe handwritten documents to enhance discovery. Toward this end, we have already created a site to manage crowdsourced transcription projects using the platform from the Paige. In a third example, we have been in touch with the descendants of two alumni, Fu Cheng Situ and Lang Chung, and hope to identify descendants of other Chinese alumni to add to the archive. Finally, we may host a Wikipedia edit-a-thon to create and edit entries on these alumni in English and Chinese. A PA student from China is creating a Wikipedia club on campus now and has offered to help with this. In conclusion, the course, Silences and Gaps, on the record of Chinese students at Phillips Academy from the late 19th through the 20th century, examines the process of how archival records have been created and preserved. Interpretation of records occurs on a continuum from the creation of the record to its use by the current user researcher that includes mediation by archivists. As part of the analysis of available records in the archives, students identify, interrogate, and visualize the reasons for such silences and gaps or evidence of power relationships in the documentary record that may impact the research process, historical memory, and community remembrance. Phillips Academy principal Alfred Stearns, therefore, figures large in the contextualizing and reading of sources, and the students continue to negotiate how to give agency back to the Chinese students themselves. Sophie Huang, for example, tries to ask, quote, questions that still centered around what Frank Lin did outside of class and what he spent his money on, unquote. One reason why so many of the students came to similar conclusions was due to the fact that when we started teaching this course, only about 30% of the archival documents had been digitized. We can see, for example, a fascinating case and one that needs further research in the student Jiang Hongren, PA class of 1879, the first Chinese graduate of Columbia Law School, who made his way back from China to Hawaii in 1882, 1 year after all Chinese students were recalled back to China in 1881 in anticipation of the Chinese Exclusion Act. We've explored, together with our students, complications of sharing our digitized collections widely, and we have a few questions as we move forward. How can this project deal with differing conceptions of privacy between United States and Chinese cultures? Should our project address social justice and seek to be a reparative archive? If so, what would this look like? By sharing our workflow, design goals, pedagogical challenges, and student work, this co-presentation brings attention to a collection that illuminates in particular the understudied experiences of Chinese students in the United States and the diffusion of American values and educational models abroad. Thanks so much. We're eager to answer your questions now or contact us online via email.
Thank you, Paige and Hijoo. I now have some questions for you. The first comes from Matt Stahl. How do you balance the use of student records in your archives and FERPA compliance?
What a great question. Hopefully you can see me and hear me okay. Thanks so much for organizing this amazing conference online, I should say, to the conference committee. It's a great question. I guess first I can say that we are a private institution that takes no federal or other government funds. So we are in no way legally required to comply with FERPA. We make all attempt to do that. And so we have a 100-year restriction on access to all student records. So the material that we have shared is, as kind of indicated by Hijoo during the presentation, primarily correspondence between the principal and the students or the students' parents. Things like the yearbook, which our student William took great advantage of, and those are all online. Maybe someone wants to jump in and add something.
Nope, I think you got it.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. How are you handling, this is from an anonymous question. How are you handling translations, particularly the use of slang?
Hijoo, maybe you want to try to address that?
Yeah, translation of all the original files, I believe, and Paige, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 99% in English.
Correct.
Because it's the collections here on this side. There are other, archival documents related to some of the more most famous of our graduates back in different parts of China, but our collection is mostly English. The one issue of language and translation has been the romanization of their Chinese names. So for example, Zhang Hongren, the guy that Paige ended her conclusion with, I wrote that in Pinyin because I have the Chinese characters and it is spelled in or romanized in different dialects. Like I don't know, some of the names are in the Mandarin romanization, yet others in the Cantonese, and even the spellings are different for both of those languages depending on the time in which and who romanized it. So that is one of the larger issue. I do know that before when this project was being worked on by some of the students earlier in this 2016, 2017, Paige could remind me, there were some issues around this romanization issue, but just to inform everyone that most of the documents we hold are in English.
Thank you. The next question actually delves quite nicely into what you were just speaking of, specifically in regards to working with students. So the question, again, from an anonymous participant, have you worked with students on archival research projects before? Or was this course an experiment? Do you have advice on working with students on archival projects?
Paige, you can start and then I'll chime in.
Great. Yeah, that's a big question. I guess my big previous project before this was on the history and archives of Abbott Academy, as you said, the girls' school that merged with Phillips in 1973. And that collection had been pretty nearly invisible, I guess I could say, in the archives and on the campus. And so we digitized a lot of it. And hired an archivist to process it and then digitize it and build an Omeka website. And in the process of doing that, I had work duty students who were doing a fair amount of scanning for me for that project. And then we, for instance, held a Wikipedia edit-a-thon with some Abbott Academy alumni for alumni and students to create and edit entries about Abbott Academy alums who went on to be writers. We held a concluding event for alums to come and kind of identify photographs and celebrate the project. And there were students who came and talked about their involvement with the project. And of course, we used the collection substantially in classes. So I mostly just try to make it available to teachers and say, here it is. And you can, use scrapbooks. One history instructor has created a whole project on Abbott Academy during the Progressive era. So when we did a big event on suffrage recently, we totally relied on the students' paper on suffrage at Abbott for a big all-school meeting. So, we've had a fair amount of interesting work with students, which I hope has been fruitful and fun for them too.
Thank you. Are there any plans on having this collection harvested into the digital commonwealth?
Well, currently, as I mentioned in my part of the presentation, we are trying to hire somebody to help us finish the project that we have funding for, which is to create a robust website and the teaching models, including our class, but as well as Chinese language instructors and English teachers here who've taught with this archive is also going to be incorporated. So I think it will be a standalone website or a subdomain of Phillips Academy at this point.
Thank you. Another question, has there been much interest in the project within the school? Have they received a lot of support, they being you? Have you received a lot of support from the school administration and their colleagues?
Paige, I think you can chime in, but there's certainly been quite a bit of interest from both the faculty level as well as the administrative and trustees level. So we were really fortunate to have some great opportunity here through the funding of our project, which then launched our ability to teach with this unique archive. And one of the reasons why I decided to use digital methods to teach this course was precisely to attract students, right? We are together an archivist and historian by trade, but really our mission, our core mission here at Phillips Academy as a high school is to teach. And we want to attract those kids who are, you know, it's a growing wave of interest in STEM courses. So we wanted to incorporate this really important and unknown archive with some of the brightest of our students and we were successful in kind of bringing together a core group of kids this time. It was the first time that a senior elective, this is a senior elective that we taught, was offered, and so we are actually planning to teach it again in the fall of this year, hopefully, fingers crossed. And we want to continue using these methods. And we were very fortunate enough to have our new library that was recently renovated opening in the fall when that coincided with a quarterly trustees meeting, and that allowed the students to have a very rare opportunity to present their findings through the curation of what they found, and that was the poster presentation. So it builds both from this great archive using methods that are, for all intents and purposes, part of their lives and going into the future using digital methods, and then also having like real life skills of presenting poster boards, you know, lightning poster board presentations, which is something that I don't think any of them had done to a real live audience who had interest, deep interest, some of them, very deep interest in this archive. So we were quite fortunate on multiple levels.
Thank you. I have another question from our audience. However, I do not know how to pronounce this name, so I'd rather not. I'm just not going to try. So it says, sounds like this collection is unique in the sense that it is a large collection on students from China studying the United States. They are curious if you've come across other similar collections at Phillips Academy. They are also curious about class and ethnicity or religious surfacing in the collection, and they do acknowledge that you spoke about the ambassador's son, the diplomat's son.
Yeah, great question. This is something that we have been, you know, pretty clear about, that this is, as you say, a really unique resource. And it seemed in some ways sort of like a natural or organic follow-up to my project on the history of Abbott Academy. It seemed like an area where we had a huge amount of material, and it was sort of invisible material, I should say, a huge amount of material related to a otherwise somewhat marginalized community, both at Andover and in Hull. So no, I guess the short answer is we don't actually have other collections in any way on this scale in terms of breadth or depth of relating to other ethnic groups, other demographic groups on the campus. I have been intrigued, you know, you kind of refer to religion, and I have wondered about the role of Christianity in making this connection between the Chinese students while they were still in China and Phillips Academy. So Phillips Academy was founded essentially as a seminary, 1778, and a few years after founded, they created the Andover Theological Seminary, the first graduate school in the United States, which was very conservative Christian institution. So it would not be surprising, for instance, and particularly considering the really excellent language skills of the students and the parents in English, for them to have some kind of connection to Christianity, let's say through the YMCA or something like that. So, I feel like there's always so much more to explore. I mean, maybe there's a point at which we actually need to go to China and follow up in Harbin. For instance, some alumni were involved in founding Tsinghua University through the Boxer Rebellion Indemnity Scholarship Fund that Long Chung set up. So I think there are a lot of really exciting additional avenues for us to pursue.
Sonia, could you repeat the question about the president's sons, not the...
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. So they were wondering if you've come across similar collections, which has been addressed. They're also curious about class and ethnicity or religion surfacing in the collection, acknowledging that some of this was covered when you spoke about the diplomat's son.
Yeah, I mean, ethnicity, they're all Chinese outside of Thomas Yuan, who our student William surmises, and I don't know, could be the first Korean Chinese mixed race student, but he never graduated from Phillips Academy. In terms of class, our colleague at MIT actually has written and presented on this issue. I don't remember specifically the student's name, Paige, but she has looked at issue of class, and that is really where actually our student, Olivia Lai, she really wanted to think about emotions and sentiments, thinking that she would find really disgruntled or students who are unhappy due to the political situation of anti-Chinese, especially sentiment, anti-Asian sentiments, but really she had a hard time finding that. And that is why she looked toward the gender analysis, because there was much more there in her reading of the 6 files that she chose, who were some of the more prominent students here, to look at unhappiness, because she just couldn't find unhappiness in the files that she chose. So it went contrary to what her hypothesis was, which was they're going to be unhappy in an America that is largely politically anti-Chinese.
Thank you. This is a question for Paige. We've had a request if you can just briefly explain what Abbott Academy is.
Oh, sorry. Abbott Academy was a girls' school founded by essentially the same people who created Phillips Academy in Andover across the street, and it merged with Phillips in 1973.
Thank you. We're actually going to end here. This is it for the questions. Thank you very much, Hijoo and Paige. It was fantastic to hear about something I had no idea about myself.
Thank you.